I thought the silence in the hallway would be the hardest part of losing my parents. But I was wrong. It took less than 3 hours after the funeral for my older sister to look me in the eye and tell me I didn't belong. She gripped the keys to the only home I had ever known and said the house was for blood relatives only. I was 33, grieving, and realizing my family had died along with them. The rain in Briar Glen always felt different than it did anywhere else in Pennsylvania. It was heavier, colder, and seemed to soak into the very marrow of your bones. I stood by the graveside, my heels sinking slightly into the softened earth, listening to the pastor drone on about peace and eternal rest. I felt neither. I felt a hollow, vibrating numbness that started in my chest and radiated out to my fingertips, which were currently clutching a damp tissue that had disintegrated hours ago. I was 33 years old, and I was an orphan. My phone buzzed in my coat pocket for the third time in 10 minutes. I did not need to look at the screen to know it was my project manager from Redwood Client Solutions asking about the quarterly data migration. Grief did not stop the corporate clock. I silenced it again, sliding my hand back into my pocket, trying to focus on the casket where my mother and father lay together. They had gone together. A sudden highway accident that felt too violent for two people who had spent their lives gardening and reading mystery novels. Beside me, my sister Lauren stood like a statue carved from ice. She was 5 years older than me, 38, and wearing a black dress that looked tailored specifically for this moment. Her face was dry. While I was a mess of running mascara and shaking shoulders, Lauren was pure, terrifying efficiency. Since I had arrived yesterday, numb with shock, Lauren had been a blur of motion. She had collected the spare keys from the neighbors. She had directed the funeral home director with sharp, chopping hand gestures. She had ordered the floral arrangements without asking me for a single opinion. "We need to keep this moving." She had whispered to me in the limo on the way over, "I cannot afford to miss more work. I have a department to run." I had nodded, thinking it was her way of coping. Some people cried. Lauren organized. I tried to be grateful that one of us was functioning, because I certainly was not. When the service ended, I turned to her, reaching out to take her hand. "Lauren," I started, my voice cracking, "I do not think I can handle the reception at the house. Maybe we can just—" She pulled her hand away before our skin even touched. "We are doing the reception." "Kennedy," she said. Her voice clipped and loud enough for the stragglers to hear. "Mom and Dad would have wanted it properly handled. Do not make a scene." I swallowed the lump in my throat and followed her to the car. The house on Elm Street was exactly as I remembered it, yet entirely foreign. It was a sprawling Victorian with white siding and a wraparound porch, the place where I had scraped my knees, learned to ride a bike, and had my first kiss. But as I walked through the front door, the air felt stagnant. The house was full of people, neighbors, church friends, people my parents had known for 40 years. I drifted through the rooms like a ghost, accepting condolences, nodding when people said how much I looked like my mother. A kindness, considering I was adopted, though most people in Briar Glen seemed to have forgotten that detail over the decades. My parents certainly had. They had never treated me as anything other than their daughter. Lauren, however, was holding court in the kitchen. She was directing the catering staff, pointing out where trays should go. I watched her from the doorway. She looked powerful. She looked like she owned the room. I saw Calvin and Doreen Holt standing near the refrigerator. They had been my parents' best friends since before I was born. Uncle Calvin and Aunt Doreen. I used to call them. I walked over, desperate for a familiar, comforting face. "Calvin, Doreen," I said, managing a weak smile. "Thank you for coming." Calvin looked at his shoes. He was a tall man who usually had a joke ready, but today he looked pale and sweaty. Doreen gave me a tight, brief hug, but her eyes darted over my shoulder toward Lauren. "It is a hard day." "Kennedy," Doreen said, her voice unusually high. "You just hang in there. We should go pay our respects to your sister," Calvin muttered, peeling away from me. I stood alone in the kitchen, feeling a cold draft that had nothing to do with the weather. By 7 in the evening, the last guest had departed. The house was quiet, save for the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. I was exhausted. My bones ached. All I wanted to do was climb into my old twin bed in the guest room, my room, and sleep for a week. I found Lauren in the living room. She was sitting on the sofa, a glass of red wine in her hand, staring at the empty fireplace. "I am going to head up to bed," I said softly. "We can go through the paperwork tomorrow? I know we need to talk about the will and the funeral costs." Lauren took a sip of wine and did not look at me. "You cannot stay here tonight." I paused, hand on the banister. "What?" She turned her head slowly. Her eyes were hard, devoid of the red-rimmed exhaustion that marked my own face. "I said you cannot stay here," she repeated clearly. "I need the house empty. I have things to sort through, and I do not want you underfoot." "Lauren," I said, stepping back down into the room, "I live 5 hours away. I have nowhere else to go. This is our house." She set the wineglass down on the coffee table with a sharp clink. "That is where you are confused," she said. "This is not our house. This is my house." I stared at her, my brain struggling to process the words. I assumed it was grief talking, the stress, the shock. "Lauren, you are tired," I said, trying to keep my voice soothing. "We are both tired. Mom and Dad are dead." She cut in, "And there is no point pretending anymore. Kennedy, you know how this works. You were a charity case. They took you in because they felt sorry for you. But when it comes to the estate, when it comes to the legacy of this family, that goes to blood only." The room seemed to tilt. The cruelty was so casual, delivered with the same tone she might use to order a sandwich. "That is not true," I whispered. "They loved us both. They treated us exactly the same." Lauren stood up, smoothing her skirt. She walked over to me, invading my personal space until I could smell the wine on her breath. "They felt guilty." She said, "That is not the same as love. And legally, it does not matter what you think they felt. The house, the accounts, everything, it stays in the Russell line. You are not a Russell. You never were." I felt a flash of anger cut through the shock. "I am their daughter," I said, my voice shaking. "My name is on the birth certificate. My name is on the adoption decree. Paperwork can be complicated," Lauren said dismissively, "especially when people change their minds. Now, I need you to leave. Go to a hotel. Go back to the city. I do not care. But you are not sleeping in this house." I looked at her, searching for the sister who had once taught me how to braid my hair, who had defended me from bullies in the 3rd grade. She was gone. In her place was a stranger with cold eyes and a heart full of something that looked dangerously like hate. "I am not leaving," I said, gripping the banister. Lauren sighed, as if I were a toddler throwing a tantrum. "Fine," she said. "Sleep on the couch if you must, but do not get comfortable." She turned and walked up the stairs, leaving me standing in the dark hallway, listening to the sound of her bedroom door clicking shut. I did not sleep. I lay on the stiff sofa in the living room, staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle. Every creak sounded like a warning. I told myself it would be better in the morning. Lauren would wake up, realize she had been irrational, and apologize. We would cry together and start the hard work of healing. I was wrong. I woke up to the sound of a drill. The morning light was gray and weak, filtering through the heavy drapes. I sat up, confused, rubbing my stiff neck. The front door was open. I stumbled toward it and froze. A locksmith was there, kneeling on the porch, changing the deadbolt. Lauren was standing in the driveway, arms crossed, watching him. Beside her, on the damp concrete of the porch, sat my 2 suitcases and 3 cardboard boxes I had brought with me. "What is going on?" I demanded, stepping out onto the porch in my wrinkled clothes. Lauren turned. She looked fresh, showered, and ready for battle. "I told you," she said. "I need the house secured." "You are changing the locks?" I asked. my voice rising in disbelief. While I am still here? You are not here, she said calmly. You are leaving. I packed the rest of your things. I looked at the boxes. They were taped shut. Lauren, you cannot do this. I said, I have rights. I need to see the will. The will is being handled, she said, and until probate is settled, as the executor, I have the right to secure the assets. You are a liability. Kennedy. I walked over to the boxes, my hands shaking. I ripped the tape off the top one. It was filled with my clothes, thrown in haphazardly. I opened the second one. It contained my toiletries and a few books from my nightstand. Where are the albums? I asked, looking up at her. The photo albums from the den? And Dad's watch? Dad had promised me his vintage chronograph watch years ago. He had kept it in the top drawer of his dresser. He told me, Kennedy, this is for you when I'm gone, so you always know you have time. Everything in those boxes is what belongs to you. Lauren said, the rest is estate property. I scrambled through the boxes, tossing clothes onto the porch, no watch, no albums, no little trinkets that I had given my parents over the years. You took them, I said, staring at her. You took his watch. It stays with the family, she repeated. That same robotic phrase. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tackle her, but the locksmith was watching us with wide eyes, and a neighbor across the street had paused while walking her dog. I realized with a sick, sinking feeling that Lauren was counting on my embarrassment. She knew I would not cause a scene in the front yard of our parents' house the day after their funeral. I zipped up my suitcases, my hands trembling so hard I could barely manage the zipper. You are going to regret this, Lauren, I said, my voice low. She just smiled, a thin, tight expression that did not reach her eyes. Goodbye. Kennedy, drive safe. She turned and walked back into the house. The heavy oak door slammed shut, and I heard the new deadbolt slide into place with a definitive thud. I sat in my car for 20 minutes, just breathing. I could not drive. My hands were vibrating. I had been evicted from my childhood home in under 12 hours. I needed a place to stay. The only hotel in Briar Glen was the overly expensive boutique inn on Main Street, and I knew my credit card was already nearing its limit with the emergency flight and the rental car. I pulled up a rental app on my phone, my vision blurry. There was one listing available immediately, a short-term rental above a storefront in the older part of town. The price was reasonable. I booked it without even looking at the photos. The address led me to a narrow brick building with a faded sign that read, Phelan's Alterations. The storefront was dark, but a side door was propped open. I knocked on the frame. Hello? I called out. A woman appeared from the shadows of the hallway. She was older, perhaps in her 60s, with gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and pins sticking out of her wrist cushion. This was Marta Phelan. I am Kennedy, I said, trying to steady my voice. I just booked the unit upstairs. She looked at me, really looked at me. She saw the red eyes, the crumpled clothes, the way I was leaning against the doorframe because my legs felt like water. She looked past me to the car packed with boxes. You are the Russell girl, she said, the youngest one. I nodded, unable to speak. She wiped her hands on her apron and stepped back. Come in, she said softly. The stairs are steep. I will help you with the boxes. She did not ask why I was not staying at the big house on Elm Street. She did not ask why I was crying. She just helped me carry my life upstairs. When we set the last box down in the small, dusty studio apartment, she turned to me. The rent is listed at $800 a week, she said. Give me $500, and do not worry about the deposit right now. Thank you. I choked out. Why? You look like you have had a hell of a morning, she said, and I know a person who has been locked out when I see one. She left me the keys and went back downstairs. I sat on the edge of the sagging mattress and finally let myself weep. 2 days later, my phone pinged with a text from Lauren. Family meeting, 4 p.m., Mom and Dad's house. Be on time. I debated not going. The humiliation of standing on that porch was still fresh, but I needed answers. I needed to know about the will. I arrived at 4 o'clock sharp. The locks had indeed been changed, so I had to ring the doorbell of my own house. Lauren answered, looking impatient. She led me into the living room. Calvin and Doreen Holt were sitting on the sofa. They looked even more uncomfortable than they had at the funeral. "Sit down," Lauren commanded, pointing to a stiff armchair in the corner. I sat. "We are here to discuss the estate," Lauren began. "As you know, I have been named executor. I did not know that. Actually," I said, "I have not seen a will." Calvin cleared his throat. "Kennedy, listen. These things are complex. Lauren is just trying to protect the assets." I looked at him. "Uncle Calvin, the man who had taught me to fish. Protect them from who?" I asked. "From me?" Doreen reached for a cookie on the table, her hand shaking. "Honey, no one is saying that," she said, her eyes fixed on the rug. "But you know, with the adoption, the paperwork can be complicated. Sometimes the laws are old-fashioned. That is a lie," I said, my voice rising. "Adoption grants full inheritance rights. That is basic law." Lauren stepped forward, blocking my view of the Holts. "Not if the will specifies otherwise," she said, "and not if the adoption was never finalized in the way you think it was." I stared at her. "What are you talking about?" "I am saying you should not fight this." "Kennedy," Lauren said, her voice dropping to a faux sympathetic whisper, "do not fight a grieving sister. Do not drag Mom and Dad's name through the mud by making this public. Just accept the small stipend I'm willing to offer you. And walk away." "A stipend?" I asked, feeling sick. $5,000, she said, "to help you get settled somewhere else, somewhere far away." I looked at Calvin and Doreen. They were both studiously avoiding my gaze. They knew something was wrong, and they were letting it happen. I stood up. "I am not signing anything, and I am not taking your money. I want to see the will." Lauren's face hardened. "You will see it when the probate court releases it. Until then, get out." I walked out, my heart hammering against my ribs. As I passed the hallway table, I saw a stack of mail. On top was a thin blue folder. My breath hitched. I recognized it. It was a folder my mother had given me years ago, when I started college. It held copies of my birth certificate and social security card. It was labeled important in her looping cursive. I snatched it up before Lauren could stop me and shoved it under my coat. "Hey!" Lauren shouted from the living room doorway. I did not stop. I ran to my car and drove away. Back in the safety of Marta's apartment, I opened the folder. It had been tampered with. The original staples were gone, replaced by new, crooked ones. I flipped through the pages. My birth certificate was there, my social security card, but the back page was torn. It was a piece of letterhead. At the top, it read, "Harrow and Lyle Legal Group." The bottom half of the page, where a phone number or a specific attorney's name might have been listed, was ripped off. The jagged edge looked angry. I sat there, staring at the torn paper. Why would she rip this? Unless she did not want me to call them. My phone buzzed. It was my boss. "Sarah, Kennedy." Sarah's voice was clipped. "We missed the deadline on the projected analysis for the client in Chicago." I closed my eyes. "Sarah, I am so sorry. The funeral was yesterday, and I know. Kennedy, and I am sympathetic." Sarah said, "But the client is not. If we cannot rely on you to meet deadlines, we are going to have to reevaluate your contract. We need stability. I need to know you are focused." I felt the walls closing in. I had no home. I had no family. And now, I was on the verge of losing my income. "I am focused." I lied. "I will have it to you by morning." I worked through the night, fueled by instant coffee and panic. I submitted the report at 6 in the morning, my eyes burning. At 9 o'clock, I drove to the address I had found online for Harrow and Lyle Legal Group. It was a small, brick building on the edge of the town square. I walked in, straightening my blazer, trying to look like I held some power. The receptionist was a young woman who looked bored. "Can I help you?" she asked, popping gum. "I am Kennedy Russell." I said, "My parents. Arthur and Mary Russell. Passed away recently. I believe this firm handled their estate planning. I need to speak to their attorney. She typed a few things into her computer. Russell. Russell, she muttered. Ah, here it is. Arthur and Mary. She looked up. That file is inactive, she said. Inactive? I asked. They just died 3 days ago. How can it be inactive? She shrugged. It says here the attorney of record was Evan Lyle. He is no longer with the firm. Where did he go? I asked. No idea, she said. He left months ago. Sudden departure. But who is handling their file now? I pressed. Someone must have taken it over. She turned the monitor slightly so she could read it better. There are no notes on a transfer, she said. It just says closed. And there is a note here. Files returned to client. That felt wrong. My parents never kept legal originals at home. They were terrified of fire. They always said the lawyer had the copies that mattered. Are you sure? I asked. Can you check the physical archives? I cannot do that without a court order, she said. Her tone final. Have a nice day, ma'am. I walked back to my car. Frustration boiling in my gut. It was too convenient. The lawyer was gone. The file was closed. Lauren was acting like a dictator. I drove back to the rental, feeling the weight of the day pressing down on me. I climbed the stairs, the smell of old dust and Marta's fabric softener greeting me. I sat on the edge of the bed and pulled out my phone. I had missed a call while I was driving. No message left, but then I saw the icon for a voicemail I had missed from weeks ago. It was buried under the condolences and the work calls. The date was from 3 weeks before the accident. I pressed play. My mother's voice filled the small room. It sounded tinny and distant, but unmistakably her. Kennedy. Honey. It's Mom. She paused. I heard her take a breath. She sounded frightened. I wanted to call. If anything happens to us. Oh God. I hope I'm just being paranoid. But if anything happens, do not trust the first story you are told. Okay? Promise me. There was a crackle of static. Start with the cedar box. Kennedy. You know the one. In the closet. Start there. The message ended. I froze. The phone slipped from my hand onto the mattress. The cedar box. I knew exactly what she was talking about. It was a small, hand-carved box my father had made for her on their 10th anniversary. She kept it on the top shelf of their walk-in closet, behind her hat boxes. I had not seen it in years, but I remembered the smell of it. Start with the cedar box. My heart began to race. Mom knew. She knew something was coming. She knew enough to leave a trail. But then the realization hit me like a physical blow. I had just been in the house. I had seen the empty shelves. I had seen Lauren packing boxes. Lauren was in the house. Lauren had the keys. Lauren had control of everything. If the answers were in the cedar box, Lauren likely already had it, and if she had it, she would destroy whatever was inside. I stood up, pacing the small room. I was alone, underfunded, and being erased from my own family history. But I had my mother's voice. Do not trust the first story you are told. I walked to the window and looked out at the rainy street of Briar Glen. I was not going to leave. I was not going to take the $5,000. I was going to find that box. The morning after I found the voicemail from my mother, the sun finally broke through the gray slate of the Briar Glen sky, but it brought no warmth. The light was harsh, exposing the grime on the windshield of my rental car as I drove back toward Elm Street. I told myself I was going there to retrieve the essentials Lauren had forgotten to pack. My toothbrush was easily replaced, but my laptop charger, my specific migraine medication, and the notebook I used for project management were not. Those were tools of my survival, and right now, survival was the only metric that mattered. But deep down, I knew I was looking for the cedar box. I parked 3 houses down, instinctively avoiding the driveway. I walked up the sidewalk, the familiar cracks in the pavement reminding me of summers spent drawing with chalk. When I reached the edge of the property, I stopped cold. A small black sphere was mounted above the garage door. Its unblinking eye trained directly on the driveway. A fresh white sticker on the front window read, "Protected by Sentinel Security. and staked into the lawn, right next to my mother's prize-winning hydrangeas, was a sign. Private property. No trespassing. It felt like a slap across the face. This was not just a lock change. This was a fortification. I stood on the sidewalk, my hands clenched in my pockets. Lauren was supposed to be at work. She had made such a production about her inability to miss more time, but I could not risk triggering a silent alarm. The house looked dormant, drapes drawn tight, sealing in the secrets of my childhood. Psst, Kennedy. The whisper came from the left. I turned to see Gina Morell, our next-door neighbor for the last 20 years, peeking over the hedge that separated our yards. She was wearing gardening gloves and a wide-brimmed hat, looking around as if she were a spy in a Cold War thriller. "Gina," I said, walking over. "I did not want to disturb you." "Come here," she hissed, waving me closer to the thicket of azaleas. I stepped onto her lawn. Gina's face was pinched with worry. She had known me since I was 13. She had brought over casseroles when I had the flu and had always given me full-sized candy bars on Halloween. "I saw what she did," Gina said, her voice low. "With the locks. It is not right. Kennedy, it is just not right." I tried to smile, but my lip trembled. "She is grieving." "Gina, people handle it differently." Gina shook her head, pulling off a dirty glove. "That is not grief. Honey, that is business. Look, I did not want to get involved, but I saw something the night after the funeral. I took a picture because it felt weird." She fished her phone out of her apron pocket and tapped the screen with a calloused finger. She held it out to me. The photo was grainy, taken from a distance in low light, likely through a window screen. It showed the driveway of my parents' house. Lauren's car was there. Trunk popped open. Standing next to her was a man I did not recognize. He was wearing a dark suit. In his hands, he held a slim gray metal lockbox. My stomach dropped. It was not the cedar box. That was made of wood and much smaller. But this looked like a heavy-duty document safe. "Who is that?" I asked, staring at the man's blurry profile. "I do not know," Gina said. "He arrived in a gray sedan about 9 o'clock. Stayed for an hour. They carried out that box and 2 stacks of binders. Lauren looked scared. Kennedy, or frantic. I zoomed in on the photo. The man had a silver watch and a receding hairline. He looked efficient. "Did you see a license plate?" I asked. "No," Gina said, "but I wrote down the time. Tuesday, 9:15 at night." I looked back at the house, at the camera watching the empty driveway. "Thank you. Gina, can you text this to me?" She nodded. "Be careful. Kennedy, your sister is not herself. Or maybe she is finally showing us who she always was." I left Elm Street with the image of the stranger burned into my retinas. The cedar box might still be inside, or it might be in that metal lockbox, or it might be ashes in the fireplace. I needed legal ground to stand on, and I needed it fast. I found Elliott Park's office in a strip mall on the south side of town, sandwiched between a dry cleaner and a discount vape shop. The sign read, "Parkstone Legal Aid" in peeling vinyl letters. It was a far cry from the mahogany-paneled firms downtown, but Marta Phelan had recommended him. "He fights for the little guy," she had said. "And right now, you are about as little as they come." Elliott Park was nothing like the corporate lawyers I dealt with in my job at Redwood. He was in his late 40s, wearing a cardigan over a wrinkled button-down, and his desk was a geological formation of paper stacks, but his eyes were sharp, clear, and intensely focused when I told him my story. He listened without interrupting for 20 minutes. When I finished explaining the blood-only comment and the eviction, he leaned back in his creaking chair and took off his glasses. "Let me be very clear about one thing. Kennedy," he said. His voice was calm, a soothing baritone. "Adoption is not a second-tier status in Pennsylvania probate law. Once you are adopted, you are a child of the decedent, period, unless there is a will that explicitly disinherits you by name, and even that can be contested depending on the language. You have the exact same rights as a biological child. Then why would she say that? I asked. Why would she be so confident? People say a lot of things when there is money on the table, Elliot said. They invent their own logic. Blood only is a common layperson's myth, usually used to justify greed, but legally? It is nonsense. He pulled a yellow legal pad toward him. Here's the problem, he continued. Possession is 9/10 of the law in the short term. She is in the house. She has the keys. She is claiming executorship. If she has a will that names her executor, she has broad powers to secure the assets. But she has a fiduciary duty to the beneficiaries. If you are a beneficiary, and without a will saying otherwise, the state assumes you are. She cannot just lock you out and steal the silver. He wrote demand letter on the pad. I need to see the will. I said, we will request it. Elliot said, if she does not produce it, we will force her to file it with the Register of Wills. But first, we need to gather facts. We need to know if she has actually filed anything or if she is just playing cowboy. I hired him on the spot, writing a check for a retainer that ate a significant hole in my savings. I started my own investigation an hour later at the Vital Records office. I needed copies of the death certificates. Lauren had likely ordered dozens, but I had none. The clerk was a tired-looking woman who clearly wanted to be on her lunch break. I filled out the forms, paid the fee, and waited, when she handed me the certified copies. I took them to a quiet corner of the lobby to examine them. Arthur Russell, Mary Russell, cause of death, blunt force trauma, accident. My hands shook as I read the lines, but then my eyes caught the address field on my father's certificate. 1402, Oak Haven Drive. I frowned. Oak Haven Drive was the house we lived in when I was 5. We had moved to Elm Street 28 years ago. Why would his death certificate list an address from 3 decades ago? I checked my mother's, same address, 1402, Oak Haven Drive. Whoever had provided the information for the funeral director and the coroner had used an old address. But why? Lauren knew where they lived. She had grown up in the Elm Street house too, unless someone else filled out the forms. Or unless someone was trying to hide the Elm Street property from an immediate asset search. I got back in my car and drove to the Ashford County Recorder of Deeds. The building was a brutalist concrete block that smelled of floor wax and old paper. I sat at one of the public terminals and typed in my parents' names. The screen refreshed. There was a filing, a deed transfer. I clicked on the document, my heart hammering against my ribs. Grantor, Arthur and Mary Russell. Grantee, the Russell Family Heritage Trust. The date of the transfer was dated 3 weeks ago, just days before they died. I stared at the screen. My parents had never mentioned a trust. They were simple people with a savings account and a house. They did not do complex estate planning. I scrolled down to the bottom of the digital document. The signature looked like my father's. Shaky, perhaps, but his loop on the A was there. Then I looked at the preparer's information in the top left corner. Prepared by Meridian Estate Consultants. Meridian. I had never heard of them. I went to the counter. Excuse me. I said to the clerk, can you tell me when this was physically recorded? The clerk tapped on his keyboard. It was uploaded and recorded 4 days ago. He said, 4 days ago? I asked. But they died 5 days ago. That is not uncommon. The clerk said with a shrug. Sometimes the paperwork sits on a lawyer's desk for a few weeks before they get around to e-filing it. As long as the signatures predate the death, it is usually valid. Usually, the timing felt impossible. My parents were healthy 3 weeks ago. Why would they suddenly transfer their house into a trust nobody knew about, prepared by a firm nobody knew, and then die days later? And why would the deed sit in limbo until the day after the funeral? It was not just a sister's tantrum. This was a machine. Someone had built this. I walked out into the parking lot, the sunlight glaring off the asphalt. I needed to talk to Lauren. I dialed her number, my finger hovering over the call button for a long moment before I pressed it. She answered on the second ring. What? She snapped. I am at work. Kennedy, we need to talk about the trust. I said. There was a silence on the other end. A sharp intake of breath. I do not know what you are talking about, she said. her voice tight. "The Russell Family Heritage Trust," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the rage boiling in my blood. "I am looking at the deed transfer right now. You moved the house into a trust 3 weeks ago, or someone did. It was Mom and Dad's decision," Lauren said, her voice rising in pitch. "They wanted to protect the asset." "Protect it from what?" I asked. "From me? From taxes," she shouted. "From nursing home costs. You do not understand how these things work. Kennedy, you have always been so naive. You are lying." I said, "Mom left me a voicemail." "Lauren." She told me not to trust the first story I was heard. She sounded scared. Lauren went quiet. When she spoke again, her voice was different. It was not the cold, corporate executor voice. It was trembling. "You have no idea what it has been like," she whispered. "You were gone, living your city life. I was here. I saw them aging. I saw them getting confused. I had to do it." "Had to do what?" I asked. "I had to secure it," she said. "Mom would have wanted it this way. She would have wanted me to be safe. She would have wanted us both to be safe." I said, "No!" Lauren screamed, the sound distorting over the phone line. "You do not understand what I was promised." The line went dead. I stared at the phone. What I was promised, that was not the language of a grieving daughter. That was the language of a transaction. I sat in the car and pulled up the browser on my phone. I searched for Meridian Estate Consultants. The website was slick. Stock photos of smiling seniors walking on beaches, golden compasses, and hands shaking over contracts. "Protecting your legacy for generations." The banner read. I clicked on the Our Team page. There was a CEO, a team of planners, and a list of advisors. My thumb froze on the screen. There, in the second row, was a familiar face. He was wearing a suit I had never seen him wear in real life. Smiling a professional, reassuring smile. Calvin Holt, senior advisor. My stomach turned over. I felt physically sick. A wave of nausea rising in my throat. Uncle Calvin, the man who sat on the sofa at the family meeting and told me adoption was complicated. The man who had avoided my eyes at the funeral. He worked for the company that had transferred the house. He was not just a bystander. He was the architect. I drove back to the rental apartment, my mind racing. I felt like the ground was dissolving under my tires. Everyone I thought I could trust, my sister, my parents' best friend, was part of this web. When I walked into the downstairs hallway of the rental, Marta was there, sweeping the floor. She stopped when she saw me. I must have looked like a ghost because she propped her broom against the wall and motioned for me to come into her shop. "Sit," she commanded, pulling out a stool. I sat. I did not have the energy to argue. "You found something," she stated. It was not a question. "I found out that my parents' best friend works for the company that took their house." I said, my voice hollow. Marta nodded slowly, her face grim. "Your mother came in here once," she said quietly, "about 6 months ago." I looked up. "She did?" She was shaking. Marta said, "She brought in a dress to be hemmed. But that was just an excuse. She stood right where you are sitting and she cried. She told me she was afraid she had signed something she should not have." "Did she say what it was?" I asked, leaning forward. "No," Marta said, "but she asked me how to keep documents safe from someone inside the house." She said, "Marta, if I leave it in the desk, she will find it." She meant Lauren. I whispered. Marta pressed her lips together. I assumed so. I told her not to keep it in the house at all. I told her to go to Riverstone Community Bank and get a private box. Not a shared one, a private one. "Did she do it?" I asked. "I do not know." Marta said, but she stopped crying. She looked determined, and then she left. I stood up. "Thank you." "Marta." I drove to Riverstone Community Bank. It was 10 minutes before closing. I ran inside, breathless. I need to check if my mother, Mary Russell, had a safe deposit box here. I told the teller I had to show my ID and the death certificate. The teller typed for a long time. "Yes," she said finally. "Mary Russell rented a small box 6 months ago." My heart leaped. This was it. The cedar box. Or the papers. Or whatever Mom was trying to hide. I am her daughter, I said. I have the death certificate. I need access to the box. The teller looked at the screen, then back at me. Her expression was sympathetic but firm. I am sorry, Ms. Russell, but the box is flagged. Access is restricted to the executor of the estate only, but I am her daughter. I repeated, desperation creeping into my voice. The system lists the executor as Lauren Russell. The teller said, she came in yesterday with the preliminary letters of administration. She is the only one who can open it. Did she open it? I asked. Did she empty it? The teller hesitated. I cannot give you specific activity details, but no one accessed the box yesterday. She just updated the signature card, so it was still there. Whatever was inside was still sitting in the dark, locked away by the very person it was likely protecting me from. I walked out of the bank into the cooling evening air. I felt checkmated. Lauren controlled the house. Lauren controlled the bank box. Calvin Holt was inside the machinery of the transfer. I called Elliott Park. They have us blocked at the bank, I said, keeping my voice level. Lauren is listed as executor. Elliott sighed. That means she likely filed a will. We need to see that will. Kennedy, if she has been appointed, she had to present a document to the register. I want a formal inventory request. I said, I want you to file it tomorrow, and I want a forensic review of that deed transfer. The signature looked shaky, and I want to see the trust formation documents. We can do that, Elliott said. But Kennedy, this is going to get expensive, and it is going to get ugly. Are you sure you are ready for this? I thought about the camera on the garage. I thought about the gray sedan. I thought about my mother crying in Marta's shop. I am ready, I said. I went back to the apartment and opened my laptop. I had to work. I had to bill hours for Redwood, or I would lose my job. And if I lost my job, I lost the war. I worked until midnight, my eyes blurring against the spreadsheet data. At 12:15 a.m., an email notification pinged. It was from a generic address. User 8842 1 proton mail, .com, . No subject line, . I clicked it open, . The message was short, . Stop digging, . The adoption file is not what you think, ... Your mother begged for this to stay buried. Walk away while you still have a family name. I stared at the screen, the blue light illuminating the dark room. It was a threat, but it was also a lure. The adoption file is not what you think, Lauren had said. You don't understand what I was promised. The email said, your mother begged for this to stay buried. I did not reply. I took a screenshot and saved it to an encrypted folder. Then I closed the laptop. I lay in the dark, listening to the rain start up again on the tin roof of the shop below. I was terrified, but for the first time since the funeral, the numbness was gone. They were trying to scare me off, which meant I was close to something they were terrified I would find. I closed my eyes, visualizing the cedar box. I am coming, I thought. I am coming for all of it. The crack in the armor did not come when the locks were changed. It did not come when the anonymous email lit up my screen in the dark. It came on a Tuesday morning, 3 days after the funeral, while I was standing in the kitchenette of Marta Phelan's rental apartment, trying to open a jar of peanut butter. My hands were slippery with sweat. The lid would not budge. I gripped it tighter, my knuckles turning white, applying every ounce of leverage I had. It was just a jar of peanut butter. It was sustenance. It was fuel. But as the plastic resisted me, something inside my chest sheared off. I threw the jar across the room. It hit the far wall with a heavy thud and rolled under the bed, unbroken but mocking me. I slid down the cabinets to the linoleum floor and pulled my knees to my chest. The sound that came out of me was not a cry. It was a low, animal keening. I was 33 years old, and I was weeping not just for the parents I had buried, but for the lie I had lived. I was mourning the version of family I believed in. I was mourning the illusion that love was enough to bind people together. I had spent my life believing that my adoption was a footnote, a technicality of biology that had been overwritten by 3 decades of Christmas mornings, scraped knees, and shared dinners. But in 72 hours, Lauren had taken an eraser to my history. She had looked at our shared childhood and decided it was a performance I had been allowed to participate in, not a life I had a right to. I sat there for 20 minutes, letting the grief wash over me like a tide. It was heavy and suffocating. I wanted to stay on the floor. I wanted to give up, take the $5,000, and disappear into a nameless city where I did not have to be the unwanted daughter. Then, my phone buzzed on the counter. It was a reminder. Status call with Redwood Client Solutions, 15 minutes. The mundane reality of the notification snapped the tether of my self-pity. If I stayed on the floor, I lost my job. If I lost my job, I lost the ability to pay Elliott Park. If I could not pay Elliott, Lauren won. I stood up. I walked to the bathroom sink and splashed cold water on my face. I looked at myself in the mirror. My eyes were puffy, and my skin was pale, but the line of my jaw was set. "Get up, Kennedy," I told my reflection. "You can cry when you have the house back." I put on a fresh pot of coffee and dialed Elliott Park. He answered on the first ring, his voice brisk. "I was just about to call you." He said, "I filed the emergency motions this morning. We are asking the probate court to freeze all major transfers from the Russell Family Heritage Trust until we can determine its validity." "Good," I said, cradling the phone against my shoulder as I poured the coffee. "Did you get a hearing date?" "Preliminary review is set for next week," Elliott said. "But Kennedy, we have a problem. When I went to file the lis pendens, that is the notice of pending legal action on the property, I found out there is already activity on the title." "What kind of activity?" I asked, my stomach tightening. "There is a listing agreement," Elliott said. "The house is on the market." I nearly dropped my mug. "Already?" "It has been less than a week. It was listed yesterday afternoon," Elliott confirmed. "Through Cedar Line Realty, the asking price is low, aggressively low. She is trying to dump it fast. Kennedy, she wants the cash before the court can catch up with her." "Can we stop it?" I asked. "The motion I filed should pause any closing," Elliott said. "But until the judge signs the order, she can technically accept an offer. You need to go to Cedar Line, find out who the agent is. Get a copy of that listing packet. If she signed it as the trustee, we can use that to prove she is acting in bad faith while the estate is contested." "I am on it," I said. I hung up, grabbed my coat, and walked out the door. The grief was still there, a heavy stone in my pocket, but I had wrapped it in layers of cold, hard anger. Cedar Line Realty was located in a glass-fronted building on the edge of the new commercial district. It was the kind of place that smelled of expensive cologne and ambition. I walked in, scanning the desks. A young man near the front looked up. He had a kind face and looked slightly out of place in his sharp suit, like he was playing dress-up. His nameplate read, "Rory Vega." "Can I help you?" he asked. Standing up, I walked over to his desk. "I need to speak to whoever is handling the listing for 240 Elm Street." Rory blinked, his expression shifting from professional to guarded. "Elm Street?" he repeated. "The Russell house?" "Yes," I said. "I am Kennedy Russell." "The daughter." Rory looked around the office, lowering his voice. "I am the listing agent," he said. "Your sister, Lauren, came in yesterday. I need to see the paperwork." "Rory," I said, keeping my voice low but intense, "there is a legal dispute regarding that property. My attorney just filed a motion to freeze the trust. If you sell that house, you are going to be in the middle of a lawsuit that will drag your license through the mud." Rory paled. He sat back down, tapping a pen nervously against his desk. "She told me it was a standard estate sale," he said. "She said the parents passed, and she needed to liquidate for tax purposes. She was intense. Intense is one word for it." I said, "Rory, look at me. I was kicked out of that house the day after the funeral. I have not even seen the will. If you help her sell this house before the probate court rules, you are aiding in fraud." Rory swallowed hard. He looked at his computer screen. then back at me. He was young. He probably needed this commission, but he also looked like he had a conscience. I felt weird about it, he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. She wanted it listed 20% under market value. She said she wanted a cash offer within 48 hours. People do not usually do that with a family home unless they are in trouble. Show me the listing agreement. I said, please. Rory hesitated for a second, then opened a drawer. He slid a folder across the desk. I cannot give you a copy officially, he said, but I can let you look at it while I go get some water. He stood up and walked toward the break room. I opened the folder. My heart hammered against my ribs. There were the standard disclosure forms, the agency agreement, and the sales contract draft. I flipped to the signature page, Lauren Russell, trustee, and below it, a line for Arthur and Mary Russell, grantors, dated 3 weeks prior, authorizing the trust to sell. I stared at my father's signature. It was wrong. My father, Arthur Russell, had a very specific way of signing his name. He was left-handed, and he always hooked the top of the A in Arthur backward. It was a distinctive, jagged loop. The signature on the page had a smooth, forward-leaning loop. It looked like someone trying to draw his signature. Rather than write it, I pulled out my phone and snapped a high-resolution photo of the page. Then I turned to the notary stamp at the bottom. Nadia Klein, Notary Public, Ashford County. The date next to the notary stamp was the same as the date on the trust formation, 3 weeks ago. Rory came back with a paper cup of water. He looked at the open folder, then at me. Find anything? He asked. I closed the folder and slid it back. Rory, do not sell this house, I said. Delay it. Lose the paperwork. Do whatever you have to do. But do not let an offer go through this week. He nodded slowly. I have to verify the title insurance anyway. That usually takes a few days. Thank you, I said. I left the office and got into my car. I searched for Nadia Klein Notary. She was not at a law firm. She was listed as an independent mobile notary service based out of a shared workspace in Ashford. I drove there immediately. It was a 20-minute drive, and I spent every minute of it dissecting that signature in my mind. It was a forgery. I was certain of it, but proving it required more than a daughter's hunch. The shared workspace was a renovated warehouse full of freelancers and startups. I asked the front desk for Nadia Klein. She is in Pod 4. The receptionist said, I found Pod 4. It was a glass-walled cubicle. Inside sat a woman who looked no older than 25. She was typing furiously on a laptop, wearing headphones. I knocked on the glass. She jumped. Pulling off the headphones, she looked frazzled. Nadia Klein? I asked, opening the door. Yes? Do we have an appointment? She asked, eyeing my determined face. No, I said. My name is Kennedy Russell. You notarized a deed transfer and a trust authorization for my parents, Arthur and Mary Russell, 3 weeks ago. Nadia's face went completely blank. The blood drained out of her cheeks so fast it was alarming. I do a lot of notarizations, she stammered. I cannot recall every single one. You recall this one, I said, stepping into the small room and closing the door behind me, because the people who signed it are dead, and the signature does not match my father's handwriting. Nadia stood up, backing away until she hit her desk. I followed proper procedure, she said, her voice shrill. I checked IDs. Did you? I asked. Did you go to their house? Did you see Arthur and Mary Russell in person? Because my father was bedridden 3 weeks ago. He could barely hold a spoon, let alone sign a legal document with a flourish. Nadia looked at the door, as if calculating her escape route. I was told it was a medical hardship case, she blurted out. Told by who? I demanded. By the consultants, she cried. Meridian. They said the couple was too ill to have visitors, so they brought the signed documents to me. They said it was standard procedure for hospice situations. That is illegal. Nadia, I said, my voice cold. You cannot notarize a signature you did not witness. That is fraud. She sank back into her chair, putting her face in her hands. They told me it was fine. She sobbed. They said they had power of attorney references. I just needed the money. They brought me a batch of estate forms, 10 of them. I just stamped them. I did not know anyone was going to die. I looked at her. She was not a mastermind. She was a cog, a terrified, underpaid cog who had been exploited by a machine much larger than her. This was not physical abuse. My parents had not been beaten into signing. They had been bypassed entirely. Someone had forged their names, and Meridian had used this girl to rubber stamp the theft. I need you to write that down. I said. I cannot, she wailed. I will lose my license. I will go to jail. You are going to lose your license either way. I said, but if you help me now, if you testify that you never saw my parents, you might stay out of prison. If you lie, and I prove it later with forensic handwriting analysis, you are going down for estate fraud. Nadia looked at me, tears streaming down her face. She reached for a notepad. I left her office 10 minutes later with a signed affidavit stating she had not witnessed the signing of the Russell documents. It was the first solid weapon I had. I sat in my car, staring at the affidavit. My phone buzzed. It was Lauren. I opened the text thread. It was a wall of blue bubbles. She had been texting me for the last hour while I was with Nadia. I am sorry about the house. I really am. You have to understand. I am drowning here. Why won't you answer me? You always do this. You shut down. You think you are so perfect. Mom and Dad always treated you like you were made of glass. Be careful with Kennedy. She has abandonment issues. What about me? You stole my life. Kennedy, you came in and took all the air in the room. I was the one who drove Mom to chemo. I was the one who balanced their checkbook. You just came home for holidays and got the hugs. I earned this house. I earned every brick of it. I read the texts twice. The resentment radiating from the screen was toxic. It wasn't just greed. It was decades of jealousy festering under the surface. Lauren didn't just want the money. She wanted to punish me for being loved. She believed she had paid for the inheritance with her labor, while I had merely existed to receive it. I typed a reply, my fingers shaking slightly. They loved us both. Lauren, but you are letting strangers rob their grave because you are jealous of a ghost. I hit send. I needed to find the source. Meridian was the weapon, but who pulled the trigger? And why was the original law firm, Harrow and Lyle, silent? I drove to the old brick building that housed Harrow and Lyle. I had been there in part 1, but I had been too polite. Today, I was not polite. I walked past the receptionist who had stonewalled me. Hey, you cannot go back there, she shouted. I ignored her and pushed through the double doors into the hallway of offices. I saw a nameplate. Simone Dax, senior paralegal. The door was open. Simone was a woman in her 50s with sharp glasses and a no-nonsense haircut. She looked up as I barged in. I am Kennedy Russell. I said, and I am not leaving until you tell me why Evan Lyle left this firm and why my parents' file is gutted. Simone stared at me over her glasses. She did not yell. She did not call security. She stood up, walked to the door, and closed it gently. She turned back to me, her voice low. Evan Lyle was a good attorney, she said. But he had a gambling problem. He left because the partners found out he was borrowing from client retainers. My mouth fell open. And my parents? I asked. Simone sighed, leaning against her desk. Your parents trusted him. When he left, a lot of files migrated. We tried to recover them, but the electronic records were wiped. Wiped by who? I asked. Simone hesitated. She looked at the door, then back at me. Look at who paid the bills. Kennedy, in the last 6 months, we stopped receiving checks from your parents. The invoices were paid by a third-party processor. Who? I asked. She wrote a name on a sticky note and slid it across the desk. Meridian Estate Consultants. They bought the file, Simone said softly. Evan sold a batch of client data to them before he bolted. Vulnerable seniors, people with assets but declining health. It is a lead generation list for predatory estate planners. I took the sticky note. My hand was trembling. So they targeted them? I asked. Simone nodded. They knew exactly how much your parents were worth, and they knew Evan was gone. It was a perfect storm. Thank you. Simone. I left the office feeling like I was walking through a nightmare. My parents hadn't just been unlucky, they had been sold. I needed to confirm the money trail. I called the bank, not the local branch, but the main customer service line. I used my mother's social security number and the automated system to check the last 10 transactions on the joint checking account. I had the PIN because it was my birthday. Transaction 1, $500 to Grocer's Market. Transaction 2, $200 to CVS Pharmacy. Transaction 3, $10,000 to Meridian Estate Consultants. Transaction 4, $20,000 to Meridian Estate Consultants. $30,000. They had drained $30,000 from my parents' savings in the 2 months before they died. I sat on a park bench in the town square, the wind biting through my coat. I felt sick. My parents were frugal. They clipped coupons. They would never have spent that kind of money unless they were terrified or coerced. Lauren had to know. She was the one balancing the checkbook, according to her texts. She had watched this money leave the account. She had let it happen. Or maybe she had helped it happen. I pulled out my laptop right there on the bench, tethering it to my phone. I needed to go back. I needed to understand what my mother was thinking. I logged into my old email account, the one I had used in college. I searched for emails from my mother. Most were recipes or just checking in notes, but I filtered by attachment. There was one from 4 years ago. Subject: just in case. I opened it. It was a scanned PDF of a handwritten letter. Kennedy, my love, I am writing this because your father had a scare with his heart today, and it made me realize we have not been clear about things. We love you both so much, but we worry about Lauren. She carries things heavy. She thinks she has to control everything to be safe. If anything ever happens to us, and things get confusing, there is someone who knows the whole story. Her name is Maris Caldwell. She helped us when we brought you home. We made a promise to her, and she made one to us. If you ever feel lost, find Maris. She will know what to do. Trust her. Love. Mom. Maris Caldwell. I had never heard the name. I typed it into the search bar. Maris Caldwell. Briar Glen. Nothing. I broadened the search. Maris Caldwell, Pennsylvania. A hit. Northlake Family Services. Staff Directory, Maris Caldwell, Volunteer Coordinator. Northlake was a city about 40 minutes away. It was a gritty, industrial place, very different from the manicured lawns of Briar Glen. Why would my mother, a suburban housewife, have a deep connection with a social worker in Northlake? And what promise had they made? I looked at the time. It was 4 o'clock. Northlake Family Services would be open until 5. I closed the laptop. I had the affidavit from the notary. I had the fraudulent listing agreement. I had the money trail to Meridian. But I still didn't have the truth about why I was adopted or why the house was so important to this promise. I walked back to my car. The anonymous email from the night before echoed in my head. The adoption file is not what you think. I was done being scared. I was done crying on kitchen floors. I started the engine and turned the car toward Northlake. Northlake was not like Briar Glen, where my hometown was manicured lawns and silent, judgment-filled cul-de-sacs. Northlake was rusted iron and wet pavement. It was a city that had seen its best days 40 years ago and was now trying to claw its way back to relevance. I parked my rental car outside a converted warehouse that bore the sign Northlake Family Services. The rain had followed me. It streaked the windows of the building, blurring the neon open sign in the lobby. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. I looked tired. The circles under my eyes were deepening into bruises, and my hair was pulled back in a severe knot. I did not look like the successful project manager I had been a week ago. I looked like a woman hunting for a ghost. I walked inside. The waiting room smelled of damp wool and copier toner. A security guard nodded at me as I approached the front desk. "I am looking for Maris Caldwell," I said, the receptionist. A young man with bright blue headphones around his neck pointed down a long hallway. "Office 4B, he said. but she is packing up for the day. I walked down the corridor, listening to the sound of my heels clicking on the linoleum. The door to 4B was open. Inside, a woman was placing files into a cabinet. She looked to be in her 60s, with short silver hair and a posture that suggested she had spent a lifetime carrying other people's burdens. She wore a thick cardigan and reading glasses on a chain. "Maris?" I asked softly. She turned. Her eyes were sharp, intelligent, and brown. She scanned my face, and for a moment, I saw confusion. Then, her expression softened, collapsing into something that looked like sorrow. "You have Mary's chin," she said. I let out a breath I did not know I was holding. "I am Kennedy," I said. "I know," she said. She took off her glasses and set them on the desk. She did not offer a handshake. She walked around the desk and motioned to a worn fabric chair. "Sit down." "Kennedy." I sat. The office was small but warm, filled with photos of smiling children and inspirational quotes tacked to a corkboard. "I found a letter," I said, "in my email. My mother said to find you. She said you would know what to do." Maris leaned against the edge of her desk, crossing her arms. She looked at me with a mixture of pity and resignation. "I hoped you would never need to find me," she said. "I hoped that Mary and Arthur would live to be 100, and that everything would be settled quietly. But if you are here, I assume things have gone wrong. They have gone very wrong." I said, "My parents died in a car accident last week. My sister, Lauren, has locked me out of the house. She says the estate is for blood relatives only. She has transferred the deed into a trust I have never heard of." Maris closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, they were hard. "The Heritage Trust?" she asked. "Yes," I said, surprised. "The Russell Family Heritage Trust. That is not the plan your mother made," Maris said firmly. "What do you mean?" Maris walked over to the window, looking out at the gray street. "Kennedy, your adoption was not a random event. It was a private placement. Your biological mother was a woman named Sarah Jenkins. She was a dear friend of mine, and she knew your mother, Mary, through a grief support group years ago." I stared at her. I had never known a name. My parents had always said the records were sealed. "Sarah died when you were an infant." Maris continued, her voice steady. "There was no father in the picture. It was tragic, but it was not scandalous. It was just life. Your mother, Mary, fell in love with you the moment she saw you. She wanted you. Arthur wanted you. They brought you home, and they legally adopted you. You are their daughter in every way that matters." "Then why is Lauren doing this?" I asked, my voice cracking. "Why does she hate me so much?" Maris turned back to me. "Because Mary was afraid of this exact scenario." She said, "Your mother loved Lauren, but she knew her faults. She knew Lauren struggled with jealousy. She knew Lauren felt displaced when you came along. Mary spent her life trying to overcompensate for that, trying to make Lauren feel secure, but she worried that if she and Arthur passed away, Lauren would try to rewrite history." Maris walked back to her desk and unlocked a drawer. "Your mother created a layered plan. Kennedy. She did not trust a simple will. She knew wills could be lost or contested. She created a trust. The Russell Protective Trust." "Protective?" I repeated. "Yes. It was designed specifically to prevent what is happening now. The terms of the Protective Trust require both sisters to be notified of any asset transfer. It requires a neutral third party, me, to co-sign any sale of the real estate, and it explicitly states that the home is to be held for the benefit of both daughters equally." I felt a surge of rage. The trust I saw at the records office lists Lauren as the sole trustee. I said, "It lists Meridian Estate Consultants as the advisors." "Then that trust is a replacement." Maris said, "A forgery, or a coercion." "Meridian. I have heard that name. They are sharks." She pulled a small brass key from the drawer. It had a numbered tag on it. "Your mother gave me this 3 years ago." She said, "She told me that if she ever died suddenly, I was to give it to you, not to Lauren, to you." "What is it?" I asked. taking the cold metal in my hand. "It opens a safe deposit box at Riverstone Community Bank," Maris said. I shook my head. I was just there. They told me I could not access my mother's box. "Lauren is the executor. This is not Mary's box," Maris said. "It is registered to a defunct LLC I used to run for consulting work. Caldwell Correspondence, LLC. Your name is on the access card as an authorized agent. Lauren does not know it exists. Meridian does not know it exists." I looked at the key. It felt heavy, like a weapon. "Go," Maris said. "Go now, before the bank closes." I drove back to Briar Glen as if the devil were chasing me. I made it to Riverstone Community Bank with 15 minutes to spare. The same teller was there, looking tired. "I am here to access Box 404, I said, sliding the key and my ID across the counter. "It is under Caldwell Correspondence, LLC. The teller frowned, typed for a moment, and then her face cleared. "Ah, yes, here you are. Ms. Russell, you are listed as a delegate." She led me into the vault. It was a cold, silent room lined with steel drawers. She used her master key. Then I inserted the brass key Maris had given me. The lock clicked. She slid the long metal box out and carried it to a private viewing room. "I will be right outside," she said, closing the door. I sat at the table and opened the lid. There was no money inside, no jewelry, just a single, thick envelope made of cream-colored paper. On the front, in my mother's handwriting, were the words, "For Kennedy, if she is ever made to feel like less." My throat tightened. I opened the envelope. It was a letter, 3 pages long. "My dearest Kennedy, if you are reading this, it means I am gone, and it means I have failed to fix the crack in our family before I ran out of time. I need you to know that you were never a second choice. You were a gift, but I made mistakes. Kennedy, I was so afraid of hurting Lauren, so afraid of her feeling replaced, that I let her believe things that were not true. I let her believe she was the responsible one. I let her take charge because it made her feel important. I thought I was building her confidence. I see now that I was feeding her resentment. I fear that when I am gone, she will try to take everything, not because she needs it, but because she thinks it will finally make her enough. I cannot let her do that to you. I have placed the master packet of our estate documents in a secure facility. It contains the original, notarized protective trust, the assignment of Maris as the neutral protector, and a video statement from your father and me. It cannot be destroyed by anyone in the house. It is held at Stonebridge Records Vault. You will need a passphrase to retrieve it. I chose something only you would know. Do you remember the summer you were 12? The trip we took to the lake, when you caught that enormous bass and we laughed until we cried? The passphrase is, "Sunfish Point, 1999. Fight for your home, Kennedy. But more importantly, fight for the truth. You are a Russell. Do not let anyone take your name. Love, Mom." I put the letter down. I was crying, hot tears that dripped onto the table. It was not a magic wand. It did not fix the pain of the last week. In fact, it made it sharper. My mother had known. She had watched Lauren's bitterness grow and had been too afraid to stop it while she was alive. She had managed the peace instead of forcing the issue, but she had left me a sword. I wiped my face and walked out of the bank. I sat in my car and called Elliott Park. "I have it," I said. "I have the location of the real documents." "Where?" Elliott asked. "Stonebridge Records Vault," I said. "I have the passphrase. Meet me there tomorrow morning at 8. Elliott said, "If we get those originals, we can blow Meridian's filing out of the water." I went back to the rental apartment. I did not sleep well. I kept dreaming of fishing lines and my father's laugh. At 8 o'clock the next morning, I met Elliott at Stonebridge Records Vault. It was a fortress of a building on the outskirts of the county, a place where law firms and hospitals stored their archives. It was climate-controlled, fireproof, and strictly regulated. We approached the counter. "I am here to retrieve a deposit under the name Arthur and Mary Russell," I said. The clerk, a severe man in a uniform, asked for my ID. "I need the passphrase," he said. "Sunfish Point, 1999. I said clearly, He typed it in. A green light flashed on his screen. One moment, he disappeared into the back. 10 minutes later, he returned with a heavy, sealed plastic pouch. It was stamped with a date from 6 months ago. I signed for it. My hand shaking, Elliot and I took it to his car. We sat in the front seats, the rain drumming on the roof. Elliot cut the seal. Inside were 3 bound documents and a USB drive. Elliot flipped through the first document. "This is it," he whispered. "The Russell Protective Trust. Properly funded. Properly notarized. It predates the Meridian transfer by 5 months. And look at this." He pointed to a clause. "In the event of any subsequent trust formation, the grantors hereby declare that any document not co-signed by the trust protector, Maris Caldwell, shall be considered void." "This is a poison pill," Elliot said, grinning. They anticipated Meridian, or someone like them. "Let's watch the video," I said. Elliot opened his laptop and plugged in the USB drive. A video file popped up. He clicked play. My parents appeared on the screen. They were sitting on the sofa in the living room, the same sofa where Lauren had told me to get out. My father looked thinner than I remembered, his face pale, but his eyes were bright. My mother was holding his hand. "State your names for the record," a voice off camera said. It was Evan Lyle, their original attorney, Arthur James Russell. My father said, "Mary Elizabeth Russell." My mother said, "And what is the purpose of this recording?" Evan asked. My father leaned forward. He looked directly into the camera lens. It felt like he was looking right at me. "We want to be clear about our intentions," Dad said. His voice was raspy but firm. "Our house at 240 Elm Street is not an asset to be sold for quick cash. It is our legacy. We want it to be a home for our daughters." He paused, taking a breath, and let the record show. He continued, his voice hardening. "That Kennedy Russell is our daughter. Full stop. Any attempt to disenfranchise her based on her adoption is contrary to our wishes and is a violation of this trust. The house is to be preserved until both sisters agree to a course of action. If they cannot agree, it is to be held, not sold." My mother squeezed his hand. "We love you both," she said. "Please, take care of each other." The video ended. I sat in the passenger seat, staring at the black screen. I felt a mixture of overwhelming comfort and blinding fury. They had loved me. They had protected me, and Lauren knew it. She had to know. She had grown up with them. She knew their hearts, and she was defying them anyway, twisting their memory to serve her own greed. "We have them," Elliot said quietly. "We have everything we need. I am going to file this with the court immediately. This stops the sale. This stops everything." "Do it," I said. I drove to a coffee shop to work for the afternoon. I felt lighter, as if the gravity around me had shifted. I had the truth. But Lauren was not done. At 2:00, my phone rang. It was Sarah, my boss at Redwood. "Kennedy, do you have a minute?" she asked. Her tone was formal, too formal. "Sure." "Sarah, what is up?" "I had a disturbing call today." Sarah said, "From a family member of yours." My blood ran cold. "Lauren, she claimed that you are involved in a volatile legal dispute," Sarah said, choosing her words carefully. "She expressed concern about your stability. She mentioned that you might be suffering from a breakdown following your parents' death and that we should be watchful of your output." I gripped the phone. It was a masterstroke of manipulation. Lauren hadn't lied about the dispute, but she had framed it to make me look unstable, threatening my livelihood without saying anything actionable. "Sarah, that is a personal matter," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "My sister is upset about the estate. I am perfectly stable. I want to believe that." "Kennedy," Sarah said, "but your performance has slipped this week. You missed the check-in yesterday. And now this? We have high-value clients. We cannot risk volatility." I waited. "I am putting you on a performance improvement plan," Sarah said. "Effective immediately. We need to see 0 errors and full availability for the next 30 days. If not, we will have to terminate your contract. I felt like kicking the table over. I felt like screaming that I was the victim here, that my sister was a thief and a liar, but I remembered my mother's letter. Fight for the truth. Screaming would only prove Lauren right. Drama would only validate the instability claim. I understand. Sarah, I said, my voice ice cold. You will have 0 errors. I will send you the updated project tracker by 5 o'clock today. I hung up. I sat there, breathing through my nose. Lauren was attacking me on 2 fronts. She was trying to take my home, and now she was trying to take my career. She wanted me broken. She wanted me destitute so I would have to crawl away. I would not crawl. I opened my laptop. I worked for 3 hours straight. I answered every email. I updated every spreadsheet. I was a machine. At 5:30, Elliot called me back. Did you file it? I asked. I did, Elliot said. But Kennedy, we have a response. Already? Meridian moves fast. Elliot said. They filed a counterclaim an hour ago. They are accusing you of undermining the decedent's intent and harassing the executor. Let them accuse. I said, we have the video. We have the original trust. They have something too. Elliot said. His voice was grave. What? Attached to their filing is a will. Elliot said, a new will? A new will? I asked. When is it dated? 3 days before they died. Elliot said. I closed my eyes. And what does it say? It revokes all prior trusts. Elliot said, including the one we just found. It names Lauren as the sole beneficiary and executor. It specifically mentions you, Kennedy. It mentions me? Yes. It says, to our adopted daughter, Kennedy, we leave our love, but no assets, as we believe she is capable of providing for herself. I felt the air leave the room. That is a lie, I whispered. My father would never write that. He just said in the video that the house was for both of us. The will is signed, Elliot said, and it is notarized. By Nadia Klein? I asked. No, Elliot said, by a different notary, someone from Meridian's office. I stared at the coffee shop wall. They had forged a will. They had escalated from a shady deed transfer to full-blown testamentary fraud. Does it look real? I asked. To a layperson? Yes, Elliot said. To a judge? Maybe. We are going to have to fight this. Kennedy. And now it is not just about the house. If this will stands, you get nothing. Not the house, not the trinkets, not even your father's watch. I thought about the cedar box. I thought about the watch. I thought about the blood-only comment. Bring it on, I said. I hung up the phone. I looked at the rain slashing against the window. They had a fake will. I had a real video. I had a forged deed. I had a terrified notary. And I had a letter from my mother telling me to fight. I picked up my coffee cup. My hand was steady. The grief was gone. The shock was gone. All that was left was the work. The document lay on Elliot Park's desk like a venomous snake coil. It was 5 pages long, stapled on thick, bonded paper that felt expensive to the touch. The title at the top read, Last Will and Testament of Arthur James Russell and Mary Elizabeth Russell, dated 3 days before the crash on Highway 9. I sat in the stiff client chair, my hands folded in my lap to keep them from shaking. I had read it 3 times. Every time I reached the clause that disinherited me, a fresh wave of nausea rolled through my stomach. To our adopted daughter, Kennedy. We leave our love, but no assets, as we believe she is capable of providing for herself. It was cruel, it was dismissive, and it was a lie. Look at the witness addresses, I said, pointing to the bottom of page 4. Elliot leaned in, adjusting his reading glasses. What about them? He asked. The first witness? I said, a man named Thomas K. Miller. His address is listed as 405 Chestnut Ridge Road. Suite B. Elliot looked up at me. Is that significant? Chestnut Ridge Road was renamed to Veterans Parkway 8 years ago. I said, my father was on the town council when they did it. He was obsessed with the signage. He would never, ever allow a legal document to be signed in his presence that used the old street name. It drove him crazy when junk mail used it. He would not have let it slide on his will. Elliot grabbed a red pen and circled the address. "Good catch," he said. "Anything else?" "Page 2. I said, "Look at Mom's name in the preamble." Elliot flipped the page back. "Mary E. Russell." "What is wrong with it?" he asked. "Her middle name is Elizabeth." I said, "But look at the initial. That is not an E. That is a cursive J." Elliot squinted. "It looks like a sloppy E." "No," I said firmly. "I spent hours practicing cursive with her when I was 7. She had a very specific way of looping her Es, that is a J. Whoever typed this or filled in the template hit the wrong key. Or they were working off a bad database that had her listed as Mary Jane or something. It is a typo. Elliot, a typo in a document that supposedly decides the fate of $1 million in assets." Elliot sat back, tapping the pen against his chin. "Sloppiness suggests haste," he said. "They rushed this. They probably backdated it after the accident and did not have time to proofread it against the official records. It suggests fraud." I said, "It suggests it." Elliot corrected, "But it does not prove it. A typo does not invalidate a will. We need to prove the signatures are fake." He reached for his phone. "I am calling Dr. Brenner," he said. "Doctor." Talia Brenner ran her firm, Brenner Signature Analytics, out of a basement office that smelled intensely of ozone and antiseptic. She was a severe woman with short, chopped hair and hands that moved with the precision of a surgeon. She did not offer us coffee. She offered us a microscope. "I have compared the signatures on the questioned document, the will dated October 12th, against the known exemplars you provided from the checks and the original trust." "Doctor," Brenner said. Her voice was dry and devoid of emotion. She clicked a mouse, and a large monitor on the wall illuminated. It showed a magnified image of my mother's signature. The ink looked like a highway system, rivers of blue flowing across the paper. "This is the genuine signature, Doctor," Brenner said, using a laser pointer to trace the lines. "Note the fluidity of the ascender on the R. The pen pressure is consistent." Mary Russell wrote quickly. She did not hesitate. She clicked the mouse again. A second signature appeared next to the first. It looked similar, superficially, but under the magnification, it looked jagged. "This is the will, Doctor," Brenner said. "Do you see the microscopic tremors here? And here?" She pointed to the bottom of the loop on the Y. "We call these hesitation marks," she explained. "The writer is not writing from muscle memory. They are drawing. They are looking at a model and trying to replicate the shape. Their hand stops for milliseconds to check the angle. The ink pools slightly at these stops." "Is it a forgery?" I asked, leaning forward. "Doctor," Brenner turned to me. "In my professional opinion, there is a high probability that the signature on the will is not genuine," she said. "However, I need to be cautious. Illness or medication can sometimes cause tremors. My mother was not on medication that caused tremors." I said, "She was on blood pressure meds." "That is it, Doctor," Brenner nodded. "That strengthens the conclusion. But there is something else." She zoomed in on the signature on the will. "Look at the underlying paper fiber," she said. "The indentation depth is incredibly shallow." "What does that mean?" Elliot asked. "It means the person who signed this was afraid of pressing too hard." "Doctor," Brenner said, "or they were tracing over a light box. When you sign your own name, you apply pressure naturally. When you trace, you float the pen. This signature floats." She turned off the monitor. "I will write up my preliminary report," she said. "It will state that the signatures are inconsistent with the natural range of variation for the decedent. It is not a smoking gun until we get into court, but it is enough to challenge the validity of the document. Thank you, Dr. Brenner," I said. I walked out of her office feeling a cold vindication. It was not just a feeling anymore. It was science. But knowing it was fake was one thing. Understanding why it happened was another. I spent the next 2 days digging into Calvin Holt. Calvin had been a fixture in my childhood. He was the man who grilled the burgers at the 4th of July parties. He was the man who gave me a savings bond when I graduated high school. The idea that he was working for Meridian, the company that had orchestrated this theft, made me feel physically ill, but I needed to know why. Calvin was a good man, or I thought he was. Good people did not steal houses from orphans. I paid $40 for a deep dive background check on a site Elliot recommended. I sat at my kitchen table, watching the progress bar load. The report was 50 pages long. I scrolled past the addresses and the phone numbers until I hit the financial section. It was a sea of red. Civil judgment. $12,000. Unpaid contractor fees. 2 years ago. Civil judgment. $85,000. Failed business loan. Last year. Credit score. 520. I kept scrolling. Calvin had tried to start a real estate development company 3 years ago. He had leveraged his own home, his retirement, everything. The project had stalled. He was underwater. Then, 6 months ago, the pattern changed. The judgments were marked satisfied. His credit card balances dropped to 0. I looked at the employment history section. Senior advisor. Meridian Estate Consultants. Start date. 7 months ago. It was the classic story. He was drowning. Meridian had thrown him a lifeline. All he had to do was feed them clients. All he had to do was look through his contact list for elderly friends who trusted him. Friends who had assets but were perhaps slowing down mentally. Friends like Arthur and Mary Russell. He had sold them out to save himself. I closed the laptop. I did not hate him. Hate required energy. I felt a profound, hollow pity. And underneath that, a resolve to make sure he explained himself to a judge. But first, I needed to talk to Lauren. She had agreed to meet me, finally. I think the lies pendants on the house had spooked her. She knew the sale was stalled. She knew she was losing control. We met at Hollowbrook Diner, a neutral ground halfway between Briar Glen and the city. It was a chrome and neon relic that served bad coffee and great pie. We used to come here after my dance recitals. Lauren was already in a booth when I arrived. She looked terrible. Her hair, usually perfectly blown out, was pulled back in a messy ponytail. She was wearing a sweatshirt, which was unheard of for her in public. Her eyes were puffy, the skin beneath them purple with exhaustion. I slid into the booth opposite her. "Hello, Lauren," I said. She did not look up from her coffee cup. "You stopped the sale," she said. Her voice was flat. "I did." I said, "and I'm going to void the trust. And the will." She looked up then. Her eyes were red-rimmed and frantic. "You do not know what you are doing, Kennedy. You are burning everything down. I am not the one who committed fraud." "Lauren," I said quietly, "I saw the will. I saw the typo in Mom's name. I know about the witness addresses, and I have a forensic expert who says the signatures are traced." Lauren flinched. She picked up her coffee cup, her hand trembling so hard the liquid sloshed over the rim. "I did not write it," she whispered. "I know you didn't," I said. "Meridian did, and you signed off on it." She put the cup down and covered her face with her hands. "They told me it was the only way," she said, her voice muffled. "They came to me right after Mom got the diagnosis. Calvin brought them over. He said the government would take the house if we did not protect it. He said you would." She stopped. "He said I would what?" I asked. "He said you would force a sale," she said, dropping her hands. "He said adopted children often have no attachment to the property. He said you would sell it to the highest bidder and leave me with nothing." I stared at her. "And you believed him?" I asked. "Over me?" "Lauren, I have never given you a reason to think I would do that. You moved away," she cried, slamming her hand on the table. A few people looked over. She lowered her voice, hissing. "You moved to the city. You got your big corporate job. You left me here to watch them get old. You left me to handle the doctors and the groceries and the fear. I came home every month. I said, I called every other day. It is not the same," she insisted. "You were the golden child. You were the one they bragged about. Kennedy got a promotion. Kennedy is traveling to Chicago. Meanwhile, I was just Lauren, Lauren who lives 10 minutes away, Lauren who fixes the printer." She looked at me, and the raw envy in her face was terrifying. "They chose you," she said. Her voice broke. "They went out and found you. They picked you. I was just the accident of biology. They had to love me. They chose to love you. They kept expecting me to understand that, to be okay with it. But I wasn't. I was never okay with it. I sat back, stunned. I had always thought my adoption made me less. Lauren thought it made me more. Lauren, I said softly, that is not true. It is, she said, tears spilling over. And when Meridian told me I could secure the house, that I could finally be the one in charge, it felt like justice. It felt like I was finally getting my turn. I looked at my sister. She was not a villain. She was a woman consumed by a narrative she had invented to explain her own pain. I reached across the table. I did not take her hand, but I laid mine near hers. Do you remember when I was 16 and I crashed Dad's car? I asked. She blinked, confused by the shift. Yes, you hit the mailbox. I was terrified to tell him. I said, I sat in the driveway crying for an hour. Do you remember what you did? Lauren wiped her nose. I came outside. You told him you did it. I said, you took the blame because you already had your license and you knew he wouldn't yell at you as much. You protected me. Lauren looked down at the table. And do you remember what Mom said at your wedding? I continued. She said, Lauren is the anchor of this family. She is the one who holds us steady. She relied on you. Lauren, not because she didn't love you, but because she trusted you more than anyone. Lauren let out a ragged sob. You are letting strangers profit from their death because you are jealous of a ghost. I said, Meridian took $30,000 from their account before they died. Did you know that? Lauren's head snapped up. What? 30,000, I repeated, and Calvin Holt got a nice commission for bringing them to the slaughter. You are not the one in charge. Lauren, you are the mark. She stared at me, the horror slowly dawning on her face. They said those were administrative fees. She stammered. I leaned in closer. Where is the cedar box? I asked. Lauren froze. She looked away, biting her lip. Lauren, I said, where is it? I do not have it. She whispered. Who has it? Meridian, she said. The man who came to the house. He said they needed to inventory all personal property of value for the trust. He took the box. He took the coin collection. He took the silver. My heart stopped. And Dad's watch? I asked. Was it in the box? Lauren nodded. Yes. I felt a cold rage settle over me. The house was wood and plaster. The watch was my father. It was the only thing I had asked for. You gave them Dad's watch? I asked, my voice trembling. I thought they were keeping it safe. Lauren cried. They said it would be returned after the valuation. It is gone. Lauren, I said brutally, it is pawned or sold or sitting in some executive's pocket. You let them loot our house. I am sorry. She sobbed. I am so sorry. I stood up. I could not look at her anymore. I dropped a $20 bill on the table for the coffee. You need to decide whose side you are on, I said, because I am going to court, and if you are standing with Meridian when the gavel comes down, I cannot save you. I walked out of the diner into the rain. I felt hollowed out, but I also felt focused. They had my father's watch. Now it was war. The next morning, Elliot Park walked into the Ashford County Courthouse like a gladiator. He filed a motion to compel Meridian Estate Consultants to produce the original wet ink documents for the will and the deed transfer, along with the notary logs for the dates in question. The judge, a no-nonsense woman named Judge Vance, granted the order immediately. Meridian was given 48 hours to produce the files. 36 hours later, we got their response. Elliot called me while I was at work. You are not going to believe this, he said. Try me. I said, they filed a response claiming impossibility. Elliot said, they claim their archives room suffered a catastrophic water leak due to a burst pipe last weekend. They say the original files for the Russell estate were destroyed. They can only produce the digital scans. I laughed. It was a harsh, barking sound. Of course they did. I said, the dog ate their homework. It is convenient. Elliot agreed. But it is also a trap for them. Spoliation of evidence is a serious charge. If we can prove there was no leak, or that the files were never there, the judge can instruct the jury to assume the missing evidence would have been damning. How do we prove it? I asked. We need a witness, Elliot said. Someone who saw the operation from the inside, or someone who saw the fabrication happen. I thought of Nadia Klein. We had her affidavit. That was good. But we needed more. We needed to link Meridian directly to the coercion. I hung up and called Rory Vega. The realtor. Rory. I said when he answered, I need a favor. A big one. Anything. Kennedy, he said, I have been feeling sick about this listing ever since you came in. You have security cameras in your office, right? I asked. Yes, he said. I need the footage from the day Lauren signed the listing agreement. I said, I need to see who was with her. I will email it to you, he said. 10 minutes later, the file arrived. I opened it on my laptop. The video was crisp, high definition. It showed Rory's desk. Lauren was sitting there, looking pale and anxious. Standing behind her was a man in a gray suit. He was not just standing, he was hovering. Every time Rory slid a paper across the desk, the man would lean over, point to the signature line, and tap the paper. At one point, Lauren hesitated, holding the pen in the air. The man placed his hand on her shoulder. It looked like a comforting gesture, but Lauren flinched. He leaned down and whispered something in her ear. She immediately signed. I watched it 3 times. It was subtle, but it was undeniable. This was not a woman acting of her own free will. This was a woman being handled. I forwarded the video to Elliot. Undue influence. I typed in the subject line. We have them. Elliot replied instantly. This is gold. Doctor. Brenner just finished her final report. She is prepared to testify that the probability of forgery on the will is over 99%. We have the hearing next Tuesday. I closed the laptop. It was Friday night. The hearing was in 4 days. I was alone in the rental apartment. The silence was heavy. I turned off the lights and sat by the window, watching the streetlights reflect on the wet pavement. I pulled out my phone and scrolled back to the voicemails. I found one from my father. From a year ago. Hey kiddo, it's Dad. Just wanted to see if you were coming down for the Harvest Festival. Mom made that apple pie you like. Call us back. Love you. I played it again. Love you. I played it a 3rd time. I was fighting for a house I might not even want to live in. I was fighting a sister who had wished me out of existence. I was spending money I did not have on lawyers I barely knew. But as I listened to his voice, I knew why. I was not fighting for the assets. I was fighting for the definition of the word daughter. I was fighting to prove that the love in that voicemail was real, and that no amount of legal maneuvering or sibling jealousy could erase it. I wanted the truth acknowledged publicly. I wanted a judge to say, "She is a Russell." I wiped my eyes and set the phone down. A text message notification lit up the screen. It was from Maris Caldwell, Kennedy. I found something else. I was going through the old files in the basement of the center, looking for your birth mother's records. I found a second envelope from your mother. My heart hammered. What is it? I typed back. It is a letter she wrote to me the day she brought you home. Maris replied. It changes what family means in this case. You need to see this before court. I stared at the screen. A second envelope. Just when I thought I had all the pieces. The board had changed again. I lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling. The cedar box was gone. The will was a fake. My sister was broken. But somewhere in a basement in Northlake, my mother was still speaking to me. I am listening. Mom. I whispered into the dark. I am listening. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the streets of Briar Glen slick and black under the streetlights. I sat at the small dinette table in Marta Phelan's rental apartment, watching the steam rise from 2 mugs of tea. Maris Caldwell sat across from me. She had driven down from Northlake in the dark, clutching a manila envelope as if it contained nuclear codes. You need to understand the context, Maris said, her voice quiet. Your mother wrote this letter 15 years ago. It was right after your father had his first health scare, the angina attack. They started thinking about the end. really thinking about it. She slid the envelope across the formica table. I opened it. The paper was old, slightly yellowed at the edges. My mother's handwriting was firmer here, less shaky than in the letter I had found in the safe deposit box. This was Mary Russell in her prime, decisive and full of a vision I had never known existed. To my girls, and to the community that held us up. Arthur and I have spent our lives building this home. It has been our sanctuary. But a sanctuary is not meant to be a fortress. It is meant to be a bridge. We have decided that once our daughters are grown and stable, once they have found their own footing in the world, the house at 240 Elm Street should not be sold for profit. It should be given back. We intend for the deed to transfer to the Briar Glen Renewal Foundation, to be used as transitional housing for families adopting children out of the foster system. We were given a gift when we found Kennedy. We want this house to be a place where other families find their gifts. Lauren, Kennedy, we leave you our savings, our insurance, and our love. But the house belongs to the future. I put the letter down. My hands were trembling. I looked at Maris. They never told us. They wanted to wait until you were both settled. Maris said, they wanted to be sure you did not need the equity for emergencies. But that was the plan. It was always the plan. I felt a sudden, crushing weight in my chest. It was not grief this time. It was a profound sense of violation. Lauren was not just stealing from me. She was not just disinheriting her sister. She was selling a future sanctuary. She was taking a house meant to shelter broken families and liquidating it for a cash payout to a predatory consulting firm. She turned a legacy into a liquidation sale. I whispered. Maris nodded. And if Meridian succeeds, that legacy is gone forever. They will flip it to a developer, and it will be torn down for condos within 6 months. I stood up and walked to the window. I looked out at the quiet street. I realized then that the fight I was heading into was not about property rights. It was not about who got the master bedroom. It was about honoring the very soul of who my parents were. I am going to destroy them, I said. Maris stood up and put a hand on my shoulder. No, Kennedy, you are going to tell the truth. That will be enough. The hearing at the Ashford County Probate Court was scheduled for Tuesday morning. The courtroom was a cavernous space with high ceilings and mahogany benches that smelled of lemon polish and anxiety. I sat at the plaintiff's table next to Elliot Park. He looked calm, arranging his files in neat stacks. On the other side of the aisle sat Lauren. She was flanked by a slick-looking attorney I did not recognize. Meridian's corporate counsel, a man named Mr. Sterling, and Calvin Holt. Calvin looked terrible. His suit hung loosely on his frame, and he was wiping sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. Even though the room was chilly, Lauren stared straight ahead, her face pale and rigid, like a mask made of wax. All rise, the bailiff announced. Judge Vance swept into the room. She was a woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair and eyes that looked like they could cut glass. She took her seat and peered over her reading glasses at the assembly. We are here to review the emergency motion regarding the estate of Arthur and Mary Russell, Judge Vance said, and to address the cross motions regarding the validity of the competing wills and trusts. Mr. Park, you may proceed. Elliot stood up. He did not bluster. He did not shout. He simply laid out the timeline. Your Honor, he began, we are here because a fraud has been committed, a fraud born of grief and exploited by greed. He walked to the evidence table. Exhibit A, he said, the archive retrieval from Stonebridge Records vault. This packet contains the original, wet ink Russell Protective Trust, dated and notarized 6 months ago. It includes a video statement from the decedents explicitly stating their intent to treat both daughters equally and to preserve the home. He played the video. The courtroom went silent. My father's voice filled the air, raspy but clear. Kennedy Russell is our daughter. Full stop. I saw Lauren flinch. She squeezed her eyes shut. Calvin stared at the floor. Elliot stopped the video. Exhibit B, he continued. The forensic report from Dr. Talia Brenner regarding the so-called new will presented by the defense. Doctor. Brenner found a 99% probability that the signatures on this document were traced or simulated. She also noted significant discrepancies in the witness addresses that did not exist at the time of signing. Elliot picked up the affidavit from Nadia Klein. Exhibit C, he said, a sworn statement from the notary public who stamped the deed transfer. Ms. Klein admits she never saw Arthur or Mary Russell. She admits she was pressured by Meridian Estate Consultants to notarize a batch of documents for a medical hardship case that did not exist. The judge turned her gaze to the defense table. It was a withering look. Mr. Sterling stood up, buttoning his jacket. Your Honor, he said, his voice smooth. These are serious allegations. However, our office suffered a significant water leak that destroyed our physical files. We are relying on the digital scans, which we believe to be authentic. Ms. Klein is a disgruntled contractor trying to save her own license. Judge Vance leaned forward. A water leak. Mr. Sterling? She asked. How convenient. And did this water leak also cause the typo in the decedent's name on your version of the will? Did it cause the witnesses to list street names that were changed 8 years ago? Mr. Sterling cleared his throat. Clerical errors, Your Honor. They do not invalidate the intent. The intent? The judge repeated. We just watched a video of the intent. She turned to Calvin Holt. Mr. Holt, she said, you are listed as the senior advisor on the trust documents filed by Meridian. Calvin stood up, his legs shaking. Yes, Your Honor. Did you receive compensation for facilitating this transfer? She asked. Calvin looked at Mr. Sterling, who stared straight ahead. He looked at Lauren, then he looked at me. I held his gaze. I did not look away. I received a consulting fee. Calvin stammered. How much? The judge asked. $20,000, Calvin whispered. And did you disclose this conflict of interest to your lifelong friends, Arthur and Mary Russell? She asked. No, Calvin said, his voice barely audible. I needed the money. I was in debt. They told me it was standard practice. The courtroom buzzed. The conflict of interest was out in the open. He had sold his friends for $20,000. Judge Vance made a note on her pad. The scratching of her pen was the only sound in the room. Ms. Russell, the judge said, looking at Lauren. Please take the stand. Lauren stood up. She looked small. She walked to the witness box as if she were walking to the gallows. She was sworn in. Ms. Russell, the judge said, you signed a listing agreement to sell the property at 240 Elm Street. You signed it as the sole trustee. Did you understand that this violated the terms of the original protective trust? Lauren gripped the railing of the witness box. Her knuckles were white. I did not know about the protective trust, she said. Her voice was thin. Meridian told me the old papers were outdated. They said I had to sign the new ones to save the house from taxes. To save it? The judge asked. Or to sell it? Lauren looked at Mr. Sterling. He gave her a sharp, warning look. But Lauren was done taking orders. I could see it in her face. The pressure had cracked the shell. To sell it, she admitted. Why? The judge asked. Why the urgency? Why list it 20% under market value 3 days after the funeral? Lauren looked at me. Her eyes were swimming with tears. Because I wanted it over, she said. Her voice gained a sudden, jagged strength. I wanted the money in the bank. I wanted the house gone. Why? The judge pressed. Because as long as the house was there, I felt like I was just the caretaker. Lauren cried out. The room went deadly quiet. They always loved her more, Lauren said, pointing a shaking finger at me. Even when she wasn't there. Even when I was the one doing the laundry and driving them to appointments. They talked about Kennedy. They worried about Kennedy. I was just the furniture. I was the reliable one. I wanted to be the one who made the decision. I wanted to be the one who saved the estate. And what about your sister? The judge asked softly. The will you submitted disinherits her. It claims she is not family. Lauren looked down at her hands. Mr. Sterling told me it was the only way. she whispered. He said adopted children complicate the title. He said if we wanted a clean sale, we had to sever the tie. And you agreed to that? The judge asked. Lauren sobbed, a harsh, ugly sound. I told myself she wasn't really family. She choked out. I told myself it was true so I could sleep at night. I told myself she stole my parents. So it was okay if I stole the house. She buried her face in her hands. I sat at the table, feeling a cold numbness. It was the truth. Finally. It was ugly and twisted, but it was real. She hadn't done it for the money alone. She had done it to erase me. She wanted to retroactively delete my place in the family so she could finally feel like the only child she wished she was. Judge Vance let the silence hang for a long moment. Then she banged her gavel. "This court has heard enough," she said. She shuffled her papers and looked down at us. "This is not a therapy session," she said, her voice brisk. "This is a court of law, and the facts here are appalling." She looked at Mr. Sterling. The court finds probable cause to suspect fraud, forgery, and undue influence regarding the Meridian documents. She ruled, "I am referring Meridian Estate Consultants and Mr. Calvin Holt to the District Attorney's Office for immediate criminal investigation." She turned to Lauren. "Ms. Russell, while I appreciate your candor on the stand, you have breached your fiduciary duty. You have acted with malice against a beneficiary. I am hereby removing you as executor." She looked at me. "And while Ms. Kennedy Russell has standing, given the animosity here, I do not believe either of you is fit to manage this estate right now. I am appointing an independent fiduciary, a third-party administrator, to take control of all assets immediately. The house is frozen. The accounts are frozen. The sale is canceled. The independent administrator will conduct a full forensic accounting. Once the fraud investigation is complete, the court will oversee the distribution of assets according to the 1999 Protective Trust and the Stonebridge video. She banged the gavel again. "Court is adjourned. It was not a total victory. I did not get the keys. I did not get a parade. But I stopped the bleeding. The house was safe. The truth was on the record." I walked out of the courtroom into the hallway. The air felt lighter here, away from the judge's bench. Lauren was standing near the water fountain. Mr. Sterling had already vanished, presumably to call a criminal defense lawyer. Calvin was sitting on a bench, his head in his hands, weeping softly. Lauren looked up as I approached. Her mascara was running down her cheeks. She looked like a child who had broken a vase and didn't know how to fix it. "Kennedy," she said. I stopped. I stood 5 feet away from her. I did not step closer. I didn't know about the second letter. She said, "About the foundation. Would it have mattered?" I asked. She hesitated. Then she shook her head. "Probably not. I was so angry." She took a step toward me. "I am sorry," she said. "I know that doesn't fix it. But I am. I was so lonely." "Kennedy." I looked at her. I saw the sister I used to play tag with. I saw the sister who protected me from the bullies, but I also saw the woman who changed the locks and forged a will to erase my name. "You don't get to rewrite who I am." "Lauren," I said. My voice was steady. "You don't get to decide I'm not a daughter just because you are hurting. That is not how family works." She nodded, tears dripping off her chin. "Will you ever forgive me?" she asked. I looked at her. I thought about the house. I thought about the watch. I thought about the years of holidays we would never have. "I don't know." I said honestly. I walked past her. I pushed through the heavy double doors and out into the daylight. The weeks that followed were a blur of paperwork. The independent fiduciary, a stern man named Mr. Henderson, took over the house. He inventoried everything. He fired the security company. He removed the no trespassing sign. I went back to work. Sarah, my boss at Redwood, kept me on the performance improvement plan. The legal win didn't magically fix my reputation at the office. I had to grind. I worked late nights. I double-checked every spreadsheet. I rebuilt my savings account dollar by dollar. I stayed in Marta's rental. I realized I didn't want to move back into the big house on Elm Street. It felt too big now, too full of ghosts. Marta's place was small, but it was mine. I paid the rent with my own money. No one could change the locks on me here. I learned that freedom wasn't about inheriting a fortune. It was about knowing that no matter what happened, I could stand on my own 2 feet. 3 weeks after the hearing, I got a call from Mr. Henderson. Ms. Russell, he said. We executed a court order to search the offices of Meridian Estate Consultants before they were shut down by the FBI. Did you find anything? I asked. We found a private locker in the CEO's office, he said. It contained high-value items skimmed from various estates. We found a wooden box labeled Russell. I drove to his office immediately. He placed the cedar box on his desk. It was scratched and dusty, but it was the same box I remembered from my parents' closet. I reached out and opened the lid. Inside, nestled in the velvet lining, was my father's vintage chronograph watch. The crystal was uncracked. I picked it up. It was heavy. I wound the stem, and the second hand began to sweep. Tick, 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 time. I had time. There was something else in the box. A folded piece of paper. I unfolded it. It was a note, written in my father's jagged, left-handed scrawl. He must have put it there years ago, perhaps when he first put the watch away for me. Kennedy, home is who protects you, not who owns you. Love, Dad. I held the note to my chest. I closed my eyes and finally, for the first time since the funeral, I smiled. Lauren had tried to own the house. She had tried to own the legacy, but she had ended up with nothing but a criminal record and a lonely apartment. I had the watch, I had the truth, and I had the knowledge that my parents had loved me enough to protect me from the grave. I strapped the watch onto my wrist. It was too big, but I liked the weight of it. I walked out of the office and into the sunlight. I had a project deadline to meet. I had rent to pay. I had a life to build. And for the first time, it felt like my own. Thank you so much for listening to Kennedy's story. It has been an emotional journey writing this, and I hope you felt the tension and the release of the truth finally coming out. I would love to know where you are listening from. Please leave a comment below and tell me which part of the story resonated with you the most. Was it the betrayal or the final letter from the mother? If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to Revenge Stories. I have many more tales of justice and family drama coming your way. Share your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. Thank you for being part of this journey.